$1,000. Cash, right now, to anyone in this building who can put me on the mat. Cole Ramsey said it the way a man says a thing he has said 100 times and never once lost. He bounced on the balls of his feet at the center of the blue mat, microphone in one hand, a fan of $20 bills in the other, and the 400 people packed into the regional combatives expo loved him for it. He was 31, built like a door, a decorated competitor with a wall of belts and a YouTube following, and he had just dropped 3 volunteers in under a minute. A college wrestler, a bouncer with forearms like fence posts, a young soldier home on leave who lasted exactly 2 seconds longer than the other 2. Each one stepped up grinning, and each one got walked back to his seat, rubbing a shoulder. "Come on," Cole laughed, scanning the bleachers. "Somebody in here wants grocery money." And in the back row, slow and quiet, an old man in a grey windbreaker raised his hand off the top of a wooden cane and lifted it about chest high. Cole found him, and his grin widened, and he waved him down with the bills. Yes, sir. Get this man a chair to fall into." The crowd laughed. The old man did not. He just stood up, set the cane, and started down the steps. If a story has ever made your chest tighten before you knew why, type Semper 5 in the comments right now, because you're going to need it before this one is over. His name was Ray Holloway, and he was 79 years old. He had come to the expo because his great-nephew Danny had a booth selling knife sharpness 2 tables down from the main mat. And Danny had said, "Uncle Ray, just sit with me a couple hours. It gets lonely," and Ray had never in his life been able to tell that boy no. So he sat. He drank weak coffee from a paper cup and watched the crowd and said almost nothing, which was the way of him. The cane was new oak, nothing special to look at, and he leaned on it because the left leg below the knee had not been entirely his own since the winter of 1968. He wore it the way some men wear a watch, without thinking, without complaint. People who met Ray Holloway came away with the impression of a kind, tired old man who had probably driven a delivery truck or kept the books at a hardware store. He let them think it. He had learned a long time ago that the men who needed to tell you who they were usually were not much, and the men who never said a word were usually the ones you wanted standing next to you when the lights went out. Cole's act had a rhythm to it, and the rhythm was the point. He would let the volunteer get a grip, let the crowd believe for half a heartbeat that this one might be different, and then he would make the difference disappear. It was good showmanship, and it was real skill. The man was not a fraud. He had trained hard for 20 years, and he had earned the right to most of his arrogance. The trouble was only that he had never in his life been across the mat from someone who had already used these exact movements for something other than a trophy. He watched the old man come down the steps one at a time, both hands now on the cane, and he was already half turned to the crowd, already setting up the joke when Ray reached the edge of the mat and stopped. "You sure about this, Pop?" Cole said. "Kind enough the way you talk a kid down off a high dive. I'll go easy. We'll make it look good for the camera." Ray looked at him for a moment with pale, patient eyes. "Whenever you're ready, son," he said. That was all. He did not take off the windbreaker. He did not set down the cane. The crowd was still chuckling when Cole shrugged, flipped the microphone to a man at the table, and stepped in. He came the way he had come at all the others, low and fast, a level change and a reach for the lead leg, the textbook double he had hit 1,000 times. What happened next took 4 seconds, and most of the people in that gym would argue for years about what they had actually seen. Ray did not step back. He did not flail or grab. As Cole's hand closed on the fabric of his trousers, the old man simply turned. A small turn, a quarter of nothing, his weight rolling onto the cane like it was a third leg he had been born with, and his free hand came down and caught Cole's wrist, not hard, just enough, and redirected the younger man's own momentum a few inches past where Cole had aimed it. Cole had committed everything to forward. The few inches were everything. His base was gone before he understood it was in danger, and the old man's hip was suddenly, impossibly, exactly where it needed to be, and the cane planted into the mat, became the still point. The whole world turned around. Cole went over it. He went over hard and fast and completely, his feet describing an arc above the heads of the front row, and he landed flat on his back, with a crack of impact that the microphone, still live on the table, broadcast through the whole building. And then there was silence. Ray Holloway had not let go of the cane. He had not even shifted his coffee from where he'd tucked it. He stood there, perfectly balanced, looking down at the young man on the mat with something that was not triumph at all. It looked, if anything, a little like sorrow. Cole lay there blinking at the ceiling lights. He was not hurt. The old man had somehow seen to that, even in the throw, had killed the worst of the impact with a turn of the wrist nobody caught. But he was something worse than hurt. He was lost. He had felt, in those 4 seconds, a quality of movement he had never once encountered. Not in any gym, not against any champion. An economy so total that it did not feel like fighting at all. It felt like being corrected. He sat up slowly. 400 people held their breath. And from the third row, a man stood up. He was tall and silver-haired, 77 if he was a day, wearing a sport coat and a regimental tie, and there was a stillness to the way he rose that made the people around him go quiet without knowing why. He walked to the edge of the mat with a slight limp of his own. "Master Gunnery, Sergeant Holloway," he said, and his voice carried without a microphone, because some voices simply do. "It is you. I have been looking at the back of your head for an hour, telling myself it could not be." Ray turned. Something crossed his face. Recognition. And then a quiet that went all the way down. "General Vance," he said softly. The tall man's mouth twitched. "It is Howard, you stubborn old goat. It has been Howard since 1968, and you have never once called me by it." He turned to the frozen room, and he raised his voice. And what he said next changed the temperature of the entire building. "Some of you know my name. I retired a lieutenant general after 38 years. The young man on the mat trains in a discipline that traces instructor to instructor to instructor, back to the close combat program rebuilt at Quantico in the late 1982nd, the system the Corps used before they gave us the program the Marines carry today. The man who helped build it, the man who trained, the men who trained, the men who trained Mr. Ramsey here, is standing in front of you holding a cane and a cup of cold coffee." A murmur went through the bleachers like wind through wheat. Cole, still sitting on the mat, looked up at the old man with an expression that had emptied of everything but understanding. But General Vance was not finished, and his voice, when it came back, had changed. It had lost its parade ground edge. It had gone somewhere private, and the whole gym leaned in to follow it. "But that is not why I am standing up," he said. "I am standing up because of his left leg." He let that sit. "In February of 1968, in the city of Hugh, I was 19 years old, and I was a private, and I was bleeding out in a flooded paddy on the wrong side of a wall with a machine gun cutting the air a foot above the water, and every man with sense was pinned flat and waiting for it to stop. It was not going to stop. I knew it was not going to stop. And a corporal I barely knew came back across that open ground, not once, 3 times. He pulled out 2 men ahead of me and came back a 3rd time for a boy he had never spoken 10 words to. He carried me 300 meters with rounds, walking up the dirt behind us, and 40 feet from cover, a burst caught him through the left calf. He did not put me down. He fell on top of me to take the dirt, and he dragged us both the last of the way with his hands. If you have ever owed your whole life to a person who never asked you to remember it, type Semper 5 right now, because somewhere a man like that is sitting quietly and assuming nobody ever did. The general's eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it. They wanted to take the leg. He would not let them. He told the surgeon he had more carrying to do. He did 3 more tours. He stayed in the Corps for 26 years on a leg that should have come off in a field hospital, and he spent the back half of his career teaching young Marines how to come home, how to move, how to end a fight in 4 seconds so it never became 4 minutes, how to do the thing he had just done to Mr. Brawl. Ramsey, except for keeps, He was awarded the Navy Cross for Hugh, the second highest decoration this nation can give. I've spent 58 years trying to find the man whose name was on the citation next to mine, and I am told it is the reason I am breathing, and in all that time his voice cracked clean through. He never once came looking for me, because in his mind he did not do anything that any of you would not have done. He is wrong about that. He has always been wrong about that. It is the only thing I have ever known Ray Holloway to be wrong about. Nobody moved. The coffee cup trembled very slightly in the old man's hand, and then Cole Ramsey, 31 years old and undefeated until 90 seconds ago, did the only thing a decent man could do. He got up off the mat, and he turned to face Ray Holloway, and he came to attention, not the sloppy posture of a civilian imitating a movie, but something he had clearly been taught once, and never forgotten, and he held it. Then he reached into his pocket, took out the fan of $20 bills, the $1,000, and held it out flat across both palms like an offering. "Sir," he said, and his voice was not steady, "I have been doing this in front of crowds for 9 years, and I have never once been beaten, and I have never once been humbled, and I want you to know that I understand the difference now. I don't want your money on the floor, and I don't want to keep mine. Take it. Please. I'd be honored." Ray looked at the money, and then at the young man holding it, and something in the old man's face softened into the first real warmth anyone had seen from him all day. He did not take the cash. Instead, he reached out and closed Cole's hands gently around it, the way you'd fold a child's fingers over something fragile. "Keep it," he said. "Buy mats for that program of yours. Teach the young ones the way out. Not just the way in. That's the whole job, son. That was always the whole job." The gym came up out of its seats all at once, 400 people on their feet, and the sound of it was not the sound a crowd makes for a fight. It was something older and deeper than that. General Vance crossed the last of the mat and put his arms around the old corporal who had carried him out of a flooded paddy 58 years before. And the two men stood there a long moment while the cane stayed planted between them, holding them both up. Danny, 2 tables down, was crying into his sleeve and had no idea why he hadn't known all these years who'd been sitting at his kitchen table on Thanksgiving. Cole Ramsey stood at attention the whole time and did not lower his hand until the old man told him to. They tried to get Ray to take the microphone and say something. He waved it off the way he had waved off everything else his whole life. He shook a few hands. He let an old general hold onto his arm longer than a handshake needed. And then, when the crowd began to break apart into 100 small conversations all telling the same story, Master Gunnery, Sergeant Raymond Holloway, picked his coffee back up off the table, set his cane, and walked slowly back up the steps the way he had come down them. One at a time, both hands on the oak, no faster than before. An unremarkable old man in a grey windbreaker that nobody in that building would ever again mistake for ordinary. He had taught the most important lesson of his life in 4 seconds, and he had not raised his voice once, and he had never let go of the cane, because the cane was the wound, and the wound was the proof, and the proof was that the quietest man in any room is very often the one who already paid for all the rest of them to be loud. If that lesson is one you want more of, if you believe the men who never tell you who they are deserve a place that finally does, then subscribe and stay, and we will keep finding them, one quiet hand raised in the back of the room at a time.